Located near Hyde Square in Jamaica Plain, Blessed Sacrament Church was shut down for religious worship 17 years ago. But for the community, the church building still had value as a landmark and potentially as a cultural hub. For the Hyde Square Task Force, that was supposed to help expand its mission of youth development. But changing circumstances, including the building's deterioration, led the task force to put the property on the market for possible redevelopment. To tell us about the decision is the executive director of the task force, Celina Miranda. Thank you very much for being with us, Celina.
Thank you for having me.
Celina, how difficult a decision was this about the church?
It was a very difficult decision, as you can imagine, very emotional, because we had a dream. The reason we stepped in and bought the church was the idea of preserving the church, turning it into an arts and cultural center. We were committed to that idea, but very quickly realized that it was the financial challenge that would come with it was huge. Waited for a very long time, so it wasn't an easy decision at all.
Taking care of this old church costs a fair amount of money, and right now there are pieces of it that are falling to the ground, so you put a fence around the building, but how much money are we talking about?
So we're talking about close to $100,000 a year to just maintain the building in its current condition. And that doesn't account for any unexpected challenges that come. For instance, in November, we had fronts of the facade of the building falling. And so now we have fenced it, like you said, and we need to do additional mitigation to try to keep the building safe. So not accounting for any unexpected things that come up, it's about $100,000 per year.
No, I think there's a lot of understanding in the neighborhood about the value of youth development programs at the task force. And at the same time, people understand about the costs of maintenance. But there's also fear out there that what if this building has to be demolished? I mean, can it at least be saved in some form, even if it's transformed a bit?
Yeah, no, and that is what we hope. We hope that the building actually remains and that, whoever comes in is able to preserve the building and its integrity. It's a beautiful building and it means a lot to the community.
I want to ask you about how circumstances have changed your mission in other ways. I mean, it's still about youth development more than anything else, but the demographics of the neighborhood are not what they were before, and yet there's a great, maybe even greater need for a Latino orientation in youth development. So how do you reconcile those two things?
Yeah, so the way to think about our work is that we work on two different levels. We work on the individual transformation level, and that's where all our creative youth development programming happens, and our work around college success, right? Not only getting our young people to go to post-secondary education, but also helping them stay in secondary education and see them through. That remains critical, particularly as you see the demographic shifts in Boston overall. The Latinx community has grown tremendously, so we need to continue to focus on that. But in addition to that, we continue our work at the neighborhood level, right? We started as a grassroots community-based organization. So the neighborhood level work continues to be critical. And this is where we have placed our focus on making sure that we preserve the history, that over 60-year history of the neighborhood, where it was predominantly, at some point, it was 70%, Latinx. That is no longer the case. We're at about 40% Latinx, but yet a majority of the local businesses remain Latinx owned. So the presence of the Latinx, the Latino community, the culture, et cetera, is there. And so how do we preserve that? How do we make sure that in light of gentrification, that we don't lose that part of the neighborhood? And that's important not only for those that live in the area, but for the Latinx community across the city.
Well, of course, you also have to focus on that growing youth population, even if we're talking about a population beyond the immediate area of Hyde Square now. And not so long ago, another plan was abandoned. That was for a recreational center closer to Jackson Square. It would have served young people from Hyde Square as well. So what does that say about some unmet needs out there?
Yeah, no, I think whether it's the immediate young people in the Hyde Jackson Square area or the Latin Quarter, or even just the city, think about low-income young people and their access to recreational opportunities, to workforce development programs, to creative youth development programming. The need is there, and we need to make sure that we're meeting those needs of our young people. And I think this is where folks need to step it up, and the investment needs to be made to make sure there's equitable access and opportunities for young people of color, BIPOC youth.
One of the things that we've already seen, at least before the pandemic, was the presence of cultural programming around the church in the outside area that we came to call the plaza. And I'm sure the young people got a lot out of that. So do they miss that now, you think?
Yeah, no, certainly. I think, that is our outdoor stage. And in fact, in any of our efforts to sell the church or figure out the development of the church, we remain committed to serving that space, the plaza, as our outdoor stage. It is critical for our young people to showcase their talents there. Also, for us to bring community together, particularly in a time where there's so much divisiveness. We see our role as making sure that we are that bridge and we're bringing folks together to interact with one another, to get to know their neighbors. So it's continues to be a very critical space. And as you mentioned earlier, right now it is fenced off. So our hope would be that sooner rather than later, we're able to secure the redevelopment of the church so we can bring that space back.
Well, I know like a lot of agencies and students themselves, you have to pivot, do things differently, do things remotely. How has that been going?
Yeah, that's been going great, actually. We this really right away after we shut down a year ago, we were able. 2 weeks later, we came back and we brought most of our programming virtually, and our young people have stayed engaged. In fact, last summer we worked with more young people than we had the previous summer, all in a virtual mode. And we've been able to stay connected with our youth and keep them engaged in school, which, as you know, the data has been showing that our young people have been disengaging, high school students have been disengaging from school at huge percentages. But we've been able to stay connected with them, provide social emotional support at a time when they need it most, and also meet their basic needs. So we've been able to pivot and do things virtually. And I can tell you, we wouldn't have been able to do it without the creativity and of our staff.
When you talk about the reach to these students, because they're beset with all kinds of stresses. It could be economic necessity or technological barriers. It seems like it takes time and personal focus to reach those students. What has that been going like?
Yeah, no, it does take time. And, we've been able to outreach to many of them. Fortunately, we have relationships with some of the schools. We've been able to do virtual outreach sessions and be able to do that. But also, our staff have been connected with our young people via text, using any mode of technology available to be able to reach out to them and stay connected. Also, be able to connect with parents because you can imagine the stressors that parents are facing. And so, how do we make sure we connect with them and make ourselves available in a different way, than we have in the past? That has meant surveying our parents, asking if they have a need for food. What is it that they need? What can we do to make make things a little better right now? And we've been able to respond to that.
Well, we should finally mention, Celina, that if people want to find out more information about your youth development programs and family services, you've got a website they can look up.
Yes, they can visit hydesquare.org. Uh, there they can find all the information about our programming and anything else we have going on. We also have virtual events that we'll be doing, and we're starting to explore also what our events could look like in the summertime. They're probably going to be very different and creative, but we're trying to stay within the guidelines that have been set forth. But at the same time, realizing that we need to continue to bring vitality to the neighborhood.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
Sure, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Celina Miranda from the Hyde Square Task Force in Jamaica Plain. We'll have more news in just a moment.